everyone for today's 5th practice talk session at this year's process mining camp. Our speaker today is Zsolt Varga from the European Court of Auditors. Welcome, Zsolt.
Hello.
It's great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, when you started to do process mining, was this something that was really new in your department, in your organization, or did some people already know about it?
It was very interesting. It was actually my director who drew my attention to it, because even though we are auditors, we are also being audited every year. And it was our external auditor, one of the big four, who used some kind of process mining software, and it caught the attention of my director, and she became enthusiastic about it. So basically, when I started out as a data scientist, one of the first things that they told me, like, Zsolt, here's this thing called process mining. It seems to be very promising, and let's do something with it.
That's interesting. So the external auditor was using it, and then that brings the attention to the internal audit team.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not internal audit team, basically the IT department.
Right. Okay, great. Well, we're really interested in the audit. You have explored many different use cases for how process mining can be applied in audit. So I know that's there's quite a big portion of process miners who are particularly interested in this use case. So yeah, we're really curious what you have to tell us. Please start.
Thank you. So I'm Zsolt Varga. I'm a data scientist at the European Court of Auditors, and I'm going to talk about our process mining journey, how we started applying process mining in EU audit, and I would like to share with you the challenges and the lessons that we have learned in the past 2 years. As you might have guessed from my name, I'm Hungarian by nationality, but I've been working for European institutions, and I'm based in Luxembourg since 10 years. I have a background in IT and linguistics, and my work is currently focusing on audit automation, process mining, and multilingual text mining. So, first of all, a few words about my organization. The European Court of Auditors is based in Luxembourg. It's an EU institution founded in 1977. It has 28 members, one from each EU country, and we have 900 staff. All of them are nationals of EU countries, with a very diverse set of specializations like accountancy, economics, public administration, and law. Our role is to be the independent guardian of the financial interests of the Union. We audit the implementation of the EU budget and offer policy guidance to policymakers and legislators. Our audit reports are used by the European Parliament and the Council for the final approval of the Commission's implementation of the annual budget. It might have sounded a bit dry, so what are we actually doing? In simplified terms, we are checking where the EU money goes. We check whether the EU policies are implemented correctly and whether they achieve value for money. In order to do that, in practice, it means that we do financial auditing, checking whether the EU's annual accounts are correct, compliance audits, checking whether the revenue and the expenditure complies with the rules. So, for example, when it comes to EU agricultural payments, we check some transactions starting from the European Commission through the member state authorities, all the way to, let's say, a specific farmer in the member state who just bought a tractor out of EU money, and we will check if everything has been done correctly. And we also do performance audits where we check whether EU money is well spent. So now this work comes with a lot of challenges, as you may imagine. We are constantly trying to create more added value in our audit work, better assurance for you, the European taxpayer, that your contribution to the European finances are well spent. And in order to do so, we have to navigate the different national legal frameworks of the member states, as the main rules and regulations are common, but different countries may make different practical choices when it comes to implementation details. We also navigate through different grant management systems, and as we promote unity and diversity, we have to deal with 24 official languages of the Union. Also, in addition to the traditional methodology of sampling and then extrapolating results, there is an increasing interest in auditing entire population to have a better grasp of trends and patterns and how control systems work. And now finally, the biggest challenge And the biggest difference compared to most process mining applications, even compared to internal auditing, is that the data we use for auditing is not our own data. We are not data producers. We have to obtain data from the auditees themselves, so we have less control over the data generating process. How do we cope with all this? Well, there is no ready to use end-to-end solution yet on the market for public auditors, in the sense that you can buy solutions with built-in support for general ledger analytics or O2C and P2P processes tailored to the needs of the private sector, but there is no such thing yet for public sector audit. So, quoting Tytti Yli-Viikari, she is the Auditor General of Finland and a passionate advocate of new technologies. She made it clear that we shouldn't wait for an external magical solution. There are no magic recipes yet. We need to get going with the existing technology and start experimenting right away. The second quote is from Edward Deming. I think you have heard his name from Total Quality Management. And he very bluntly put that if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So in order to tackle these challenges, we established an internal organization called Ecolab. It is a technology incubator with a small core team of IT and data experts and several open-minded colleagues from all audit areas. They are contributing part of their working time to experiment with technologies like blockchain, AI, data mining, text mining, process mining. So what we are trying to do is to have a business-driven process instead of a technology-driven process. We develop workflows based on real business needs, and then when it's mature enough, we put it into production with the auditors. And we, of course, we are also exchanging ideas with other EU institutions and the supreme audit institutions of the member states. So how did we start with process mining? Well, when we started exploring technological options, we gained inspiration from Professor Miklos Vazarelli's groundbreaking work in continuous auditing that he did at Rutgers University, and of course Professor van der Aalst's seminal book. But the real eye-opener for me, because I still did not see a direct relationship with a lot of processes that we were doing, and then I came across this article on the Fluxicon blog about government process mining, which was a real eye-opener, because actually there is so much more to process mining, so much more to this approach than just analyzing the usual P2P, O2C processes. It can be used on more abstract levels too. So if you have the right mindset, then process mining data is everywhere. So after this lengthy introduction, let's get started. So how did we get started, or how can you get started with process mining? I hope that there are public auditors watching this stream and that our experience will be helpful for you public auditors, either to get started or just to see the differences in our approaches that we took. So first we need a specific and well-structured use case so that everybody involved can understand it, because audit is a traditional line of business and all stakeholders should be able to understand the process that is being analyzed and the methods and the results. So once you have your use case, you have to obtain data, and it's very, very important to consult your data protection officer, because the general data protection regulation can be quite strict, and you might find user IDs, people's name, or you might find some other personal information hidden, maybe not in the main process data itself, but maybe in some attribute fields. So the first time when I tried analyzing IT service desk data, I was quite surprised how much sensitive information it may contain. So I had a very constructive discussion with our data protection officer about how to handle this. And what I can recommend you is, when you're starting out, the best way is just to hash the IDs or anonymize. Otherwise, it might be painful to observe all the precautions that you have to take when you're handling personal data. Also, the best way to communicate is to use visualization, but that's the easy part with process mining because it uses a very easy to understand visual language. Also, results need to be translated into business objectives or performance indicators so that the decision makers could integrate it into their own frame of reference. So does process mining save time? Does it improve the quality of your audit? Does it give you unique insights, or does it change the way that you're working? It always depends on the specific project, but it's very useful to make it clear from the beginning. Also, reality is complex and processes can be difficult to understand. So domain expertise is needed to interpret results properly, in a sense that we cannot expect a data scientist to be a certified auditor, and certified auditors are usually not experts in data cleaning and script programming. So make sure that the findings of your first experiments are properly validated before you communicate them. And along that line, you need to anticipate an iterative process between data analysts and auditors. But the good thing is that you don't necessarily need a hypothesis to start with, because analysts and auditors, they work together. Whenever the data scientist finds something interesting, then it needs to be verified by auditors. Is it realistic? Is it relevant? Does it make sense from an audit point of view? Some findings may seem interesting to the analyst, but they may or may not have business value or audit relevance. So the best way to move forward is to share your preliminary results with the actual auditors, and then they decide which direction to take or which are the areas when it is worth zooming in. Or the other way around, if you're an auditor and you see that something is strange with the data, get somebody with proper IT skills on board to help you with data wrangling. So bearing all this in mind, I would like to invite you to join me on this process mining journey. I will show you 4 examples. The first 2, this performance audit on public consultations and an audit automation pilot, are relatively straightforward cases. They use internal data, while the last 2, the process analysis of an external organization and checking the grant management system of a national authority, are cases that are outside our comfort zone or outside of the normal comfort zone of a process miner, because they are using external data and sometimes data about unknown processes from auditees. So in the first example, we will analyze public consultations. These consultations, they allow EU citizens to express their opinion on EU action, legislative proposals. And the most well-known example that I'm sure everybody has heard about was the summertime consultation from 2 years ago, from 2018, done by the Juncker Commission about whether we should stop changing the clock in March and November. And this consultation had a surprisingly high number of respondents. More than 4.5 people voted, and most of them against the changing the clock for daylight saving. So these consultations, they consist of a sequence of predetermined steps with their respective deadlines, and the analysis of the process was part of the overall audit plan. So based on the data received from the European Commission, our auditors assembled and pre-processed a well-structured small data set, and it was originally used for other data visualization and charting purposes, and process mining was used as a proof of concept for internal presentations and to show that there is this process mining used for very structured processes, but actually you don't have to have a financial process or a purchasing process. You can use it for more abstract things too. So it was a perfect demonstration example, because the process visualization made it very easy to spot the process anomalies, even without much background information or looking at a number of different charts to see the process going. Like you can see the red lines where some instances skip the step, or you can see it on the right that 2 public consultations had additional steps after the legislative proposals, and 3 of them did not have a synopsis report. So after we concluded this project, the outcome was, it was quite simple. We wrote some information materials about new technologies and the process mining experiment in public consultations, and it was something that everybody could identify with, because everybody knew about the public consultations, and the results were easy to interpret. And also, just think about it, by analogy, the same methodology could be applied to other administrative processes. Just imagine applying multilingual text mining on public procurement tenders from different countries, analyzing the documents, extracting metadata, and building such a process model for compliance checking. So I hope it's something that we could implement in the future. It's one of my next research projects that I would like to deal with. The next step was using process mining in production for a specific project. And the specific project was a concrete automation pilot related to the annual audit of EU executive agencies. And actually this justified the purchase of a commercial software license, because we are public auditors, we audit others, so we have to be very careful where we are spending the taxpayers' money. So I was very happy that we found this project where we could justify the purchase. So what are these agencies? They are set up by the European Commission for a limited time for a specific purpose to manage EU programs like the Research Executive Agency or the Audio-Visual Agency that you might have heard of. The good thing is that all these agencies are using the same system for accounting and workflow management. So in the framework of this project, we directly accessed and extracted information from the European Commission's data warehouse. And it actually provided very useful supplementary information to auditors for risk analysis. Also, this fit very well with the aim of this pilot, because it was developing new audit methodology using new technologies like automated checks, robotic process automation, process mining, and visual analytics. So we extracted and loaded the data, and it turned out that we were very lucky, because the data extract was actually directly usable, and it provided us with instantaneous results. We analyzed several processes, but I will only cover the invoice payment, because this is something that everybody knows and everybody is familiar with. So if you are familiar with process maps, you immediately spot the clearly distinguishable happy path in blue and the exceptions in gray. Now, it's a simple process map, and it seems evident in retrospect, in hindsight, but when you first see it yourself, it's quite a revelation to see the pattern and the exact number of process deviations. So if we zoom in, we can see that process deviations or exceptions are not necessary errors, and how process discovery works. It's an automatically inferred process model based on the majority or the happy path and the frequencies. So they were like deviations for technical acceptance and acceptance by the authorizing officer, which are completely normal, and it shows that the control systems actually work. Also, a few refusals for corrections, and it also shows that the controls of the process are actually working. But a relevant feature of this process map for auditing is those cases that make several rounds of repetition in the system, because they can signify control issues or problematic items, like you see some processes going back from the last step. So it means that certain cases were reopened, and for an auditor it's very important to see, like, okay, why were they reopened? Another source of significant added value here is the ability to compare the same process among all the 6 audited agencies, because they are all using the same centralized system and follow the same general process, so their process maps are comparable. For example, the middle one in the top row, it shows almost an ideal process, while the last one, the bottom right one, it seems to have loops. So again, these are characteristics of the organization, but it still provides relevant information for the auditors where to focus their work and to ask the relevant questions when they talk to the auditee. And also, when we look at performance and analyzing the processing time, in addition to checking if the statutory or regulatory deadlines have been observed, an auditor is looking for too long or too short durations, as they can pinpoint long and complex cases that might entail a higher risk of error, or suspiciously short processing times, which might signal an override in the built-in controls. Also, a very important thing is the segregation of duties. The segregation of duties is the concept of having more than one person required to complete the task to prevent fraud and error. Again, exceptions might not be errors. This is an anonymized data and a synthetic data set, but it would exactly look the same if you would see a violation in real life. In this case, violation of the segregation of duties occurs twice here. They usually occur when the total duration is over a year. And we can see here that the verifying agent was the same as the authorizing officer. Again, it is a red flag, but when we checked, it turned out that the person had the necessary authorizations to do so, because if the finance department is small and for example the authorizing officer goes on holiday, then the authorizing officer leaves an official authorization, and the person who approved the transaction on behalf of the authorizing officer, that person might be the same who initiated the transaction. But then again, even if it's not an error, because it's justified with documentations, we can still make recommendations to the auditee for improvement. And in case of transactions of interest, it's very interesting to plot this social network. Here, the way you can interpret this graph is that you have the accounting system or the SAP system right in the middle, and in the radial clusters you have some of the auditees using the same system. And the authorizing officers, they are acting as gateways between normal employees who are passing on work back and forth. But an authorizing officer in some of the cases is a manager who is not involved in the day-to-day administration of the invoices. So you can see that they are connecting these clusters together. If there would be cases of fraud or suspicious transactions, you could plot that people who should not be working together, or when you identify transactions and people who do things that are out of the ordinary, and you can see that the social network shows that they are only cooperating on those transactions that raise a red flag, then it's something that is important to note. So the outcome of this project, it successfully proved that process mining can be directly used for audit purposes on structured data extracts from the European Commission's accounting system. And we can easily compare the processes of different organizations that use the same data structure, but also we can compare them in time. So if we make a snapshot of the process map for a year and take a snapshot of the previous year, or take a snapshot for the next year, we can see how the processes are changing. And I need to make a detour here, because in internal process mining projects, there's always this question of how to turn process mining insights into action. As an external auditor, we don't have a direct influence. What we can do is to make recommendations based on what we have seen during the process mining exercise after checking the facts if our findings are valid or not. So it proved to be an effortless solution for detecting trends and patterns and zooming in on areas of interest. It's great for risk assessment. We can also do compliance auditing with a set of filters, but it's not always evident how the process should look like. So at this point, we kept it as an open question. We are still working hard on the right approach to choose, be it BPMN modeling or some of the more complex technologies. In this case, we used it for risk assessment explorations and this thing called like hypothesis-free auditing, when we look at the data and then try to see what's in there and make our conclusions accordingly. In our third example, I will talk about how we analyze the core business process of a specific European agency. This was part of an audit, but the purpose of this exercise was not auditing the compliance or the conformance, but rather analyzing the operational efficiency. So this agency, what they do is they register certain types of claims from clients, but their clients can also file counterclaims to contest other clients if they suspect infringement or they want to invalidate the registration request of another client. In the framework of our annual audit, we wanted to better understand their core processes and how the claims are managed. And we asked them to provide us preferably with a dump of their workflow management system. The agency was very cooperative. They have a fairly complex and very efficient system with extensive documentation. So they sent over a well-structured flat file database extract with the accompanying documentation. And when we did the preliminary pre-processing steps, we ended up with something like this. And as you know, reality is complex, so are processes. The thing on the right is the de jure process that they sent us, that this is how our process looks like. And the left is the first result. So I checked it. I was a tiny bit disappointed that after hours of pre-processing, this is what I get. And then it turns out that actually I wasn't paying attention to certain specific features. So if you, as an external auditor, you will obtain data from an auditee, you have to understand what's in there. And your best tools are to check histograms for event distribution. You have to identify the real case ID. And again, what I said, check with domain experts, because as an analyst, you might not be so up to date about what the auditee is actually doing and how that process should look like. And as Anne talked about in the workshops before, sometimes you have to merge or consolidate processes or split processes or enrich data. And it really helps to have somebody who can at least do some script programming, because of course there are tools for ETL, but sometimes the learning curve is a bit steep. So it is a worth investment I think you can use KNIME for certain pre-processing tasks, but oftentimes writing up a quick Python script with regular expression can work just as well. So in this case, I realized that some of the activity names, they actually contain internal references. So after merging them and getting rid of the superfluous information or the information that made it overly complicated, we arrived at this. Now, this already looks better, but still not the same. And again, as I said, try to see or try to separate the sub-processes, because what you see on the left is the process of contesting the claims, and on the right is the process of processing the first claim registrations. So we are getting there. We are getting there. And now if I show you this, actually what I had to do is to flip it on the vertical axis. So it's a mirrored process map, but now you can see that this is how it looked like on paper. And then for process mining, the good thing is that sometimes it reveals patterns and information that would be very difficult to arrive at just by looking at tabular data. So here in this case, and it's a very good example of the operational efficiency of the agency, it turns out that some clients are regularly challenging other clients, and in order to make it more efficient, because there's always an appeal fee. So whenever you want to claim something, you have to pay the processing fee to the agency. And in order to make it easier for those clients who are regularly challenging other clients, they implemented a current account that they can top up. And in that case, they don't have to deal with wiring the amounts and sending the invoices, but it goes through to the system automatically or semi-automatically. About 2 seconds, as you can see now. So what did we learn from this? We learned that process mining can quickly analyze complex systems and processing using external data from an auditee. And it can save lots of time compared to a lengthy desk analysis of documents and flowcharts and browsing Excel tables and so on. And also, process mining can provide certain insights that would otherwise be hidden from an external auditor using traditional methods. And now I come to the last project I wanted to show you. Actually, it's one of my favorite because I think it's extremely interesting. We have a pilot for auditing the grant application process in a member state. So we contacted one of the paying agencies in one of the member states. They very kindly agreed to cooperate with us on this process mining experiment. So we received a database extract from their system, but then again, the system, it reflects their own business logic. And process mining requires data from a different level of abstraction. And in this case, the structure of the data that we first received was not directly suitable for process mining because transposition was required because basically all cases were in one row and the activities were the columns, some of them filled out, some of them not. So it means that the repetitions were missing. And instead of activities, as per the definition of an activity in process mining, they were rather checkpoints in the process. I forgot to tell you that when you will get the slides in every introduction to each project, I put some links to our documents or publications about those projects, so you can check them yourselves. Process mining is not always mentioned by name, but I think it's an important background information for you to see where we are heading to or what are we working on. So extensive pre-processing was needed, as I said, and even with the extensive, basically it was regenerating or having the data as it was, and basically I had to come up with a script that uses this data and generates a synthetic process log, how the process log would look like given that data. And the problem was that since it doesn't contain repetitions, it will not be accurate. But then again, the algorithm used by the software is intelligent enough to spot these time anomalies and plot some paths. And also, if we look at process statistics, the summary statistics of the data file already provide us very interesting and good information. So from like on the right, from the top row, that huge spike that you see there in activities over time, that was actually the December payment deadline of EU subsidies to the farmers. Then the next one, you can see that how the grant applications came in, how they were processed, and how they were slowly closed, and then all of them were paid except for the few problematic ones. And if you look at the average times, we can see this bell curve with the right skew, that most of the applications were processed in time, and the long tail of this distribution is actually very strongly correlated to the long tail of that distribution. So, as I said, it's always very important to work together with domain experts and analysts. And if you run into a problem like this, then you have to work with the auditee too. So we received some additional data sets, or they check their historical logs, and then we came up with like a good description of the process. But again, there's this law in statistics that if you find something extremely interesting or extremely strange, then it must be a problem with your data. And then here, first we spotted like, okay, we have a visual check, and then a lot of payments are going straight to payment. So we double checked it because it was a bit suspicious that there were too many of them. And then it turns out that when we obtained some additional information from the historical logs, it was due to the fact that loops cannot be generated from data that doesn't contain enough information to encode loops properly. So I hope I was not too technical. I wanted to draw your attention that feel free to experiment, but in auditing it's very important to have hard facts, and it's very important that the auditee agrees with your facts. They might not necessarily agree with your conclusions and opinion, but the facts need to be agreed on, and if you're unsure about the facts, check with the domain experts and check with the auditees themselves. So the outcome of this project, well, it's still an ongoing project, but we are slowly wrapping it up. But a very important learning for us was that legacy systems used by public administrations, they might not be able to provide the full spectrum of data needed for process mining. I mean, again, they might have been using very robust and bulletproof systems for the last 25 years that they keep on updating according to the new regulations, and these systems are completely suitable for their purposes, but you cannot expect easy to use data coming out of them for process mining. Still, we could check segregation of duties, observation of deadlines, proportion of beneficiaries selected for on-the-spot checks, some indirect loop observations, and in these cases what proved the best solution for us is to use this hybrid approach of doing some process mining analysis and then taking the database in itself and do some statistical checks, and for example we did correlation analysis between the amounts claimed and the process behavior. Like, is there any correlation between the amount and the time it takes for the claim to go through, or is there any correlation or covariation between amounts and the existence of certain process items? Like, is the selection for on-the-spot checks depends on the amount, or does it depend on something else? So this pilot allowed us to plan ahead and anticipate future challenges that await us in our work for the coming years. So the lessons learned is that with process mining in auditing, you do not necessarily need a hypothesis, but you absolutely need to understand the data that you are using. Because data preprocessing can make or break the analysis, and it might take a long time, and it is a new task that your organization might not be prepared for, but it is an investment in, and the investment in understanding and preprocessing the data will pay off in subsequent audit tasks when you want to roll out the method or the application of these methods to a wider audience. And I cannot emphasize enough, arriving at audit findings is an iterative process by a multidisciplinary team involving the data analysts, domain experts, and also the auditee. So as a conclusion, I would like to close it with a quote from Mika Janssen and Michael Werner. By the way, they write great papers about the relationship between process mining and audit. So process mining is one of the most mature technological options for auditors. And it's not only useful for financial and compliance audit purposes, but also some more abstract aspects of auditing. And in public sector auditing, a major portion of our work is not just about checking numbers, but checking the efficiency of the processes and oftentimes checking the efficiency of policy implementation. So as a conclusion, I would like to recommend you our ECHA journal. The first issue of this year, we dedicated it to big data and digital audit. Some of the projects that I talked about are described in there. Some of them are described in the links that you will find on the slides. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zsolt. That's really great. Thank you very much for this really good overview. So it was really nice to see that you were touching on so many aspects that are important sometimes in general for any kind of process miner, but also then a lot of things that were specifically relevant for auditors. And I really appreciate also the main point that you were emphasizing towards the end, that it is a cooperation and that you need the data analyst to work together with the auditor for the domain knowledge to interpret and to see, is this actually a problem or is it not a problem, right? Do we need to do something about it or not?
Yes.
So that's I think really important.
Yeah, and I think that's the main difference between audit, process mining being used for audit, or process mining just being used for analysis or internal improvement purposes. Because in audit, an auditor must be very careful about the conclusions and the opinions, and they must be based on hard facts. But on the other hand, the good thing with process mining is that it's based on the data. So if we agree with the auditee that this is the data that is valid and the facts that we infer from the data are valid, then it can serve as audit evidence.
Right, yes. And then, as you mentioned in the beginning, of course, that's one of the advantages, because auditors before also were using data, but it was more a sample-based approach. So now with process mining, you can audit full populations. And that was one of the things I was curious about. So, of course, there's a very, very defined audit practice, right? There's a methodology and an approach that auditors are trained on. And usually, I think even today, it's still based on the sample-based approach, right? So it's like auditing a full population. Does this change a lot in on the underlying methodology that auditors have to think about, or you think that's easily integrated?
It's not easy at all, because, as I said, audit is a very traditional line of business, and there are audit standards, but the audit standards do not exclude using full population audit. And on the other hand, the sampling methodology was created because it provided a good approximation with the limited computing capacities and the limited sampling capacities that auditors had 50 years ago. So they have a well-tested methodology, and sampling and extrapolation will give you an error rate, or it will give you a number about the approximate proportion of errors. With full population audit, it's a tiny bit, well, not tiny bit, it's completely different. It will allow you to make better qualitative assessments with trends and patterns and how things are going in general. You can zoom, identify areas of interest, but the methodology is not there yet. And I think it's an extremely interesting and challenging time for auditors, especially public auditors, because in public audit, our clients are the taxpayers, and there's a clear demand from that side to have a better overview and to have better accountability. On the other hand, working out the methodology is still ahead of us in details, so that's why I do not think that full population audit will replace the sampling method. I think they will coexist for a while until the methodological part and the standards and everything catches up with the technological developments.
Right, yes. Because I think another aspect, so you mentioned that the sampling-based approach is due to maybe computation limits or just the limitation of how much data, for example, you can manually collect if you have to observe or get it manually in some form. But also, like, even if the data is already there and you can analyze the full population, it could be that you have a lot of more things you have to look at, right? So doesn't it also perhaps give more work to the auditor for things they have to inspect?
Yes, it's a very good observation on your side, because what we know now for sure that if you reduce, so we don't know yet, there's no real sound methodology how a population of interest or how a selected risk population is related to the entire population. So there is still some methodological work to be done. And in full population audit, we still have lots of exceptions. And if somebody wants to check all those exceptions one by one, then it might be too much of a work and a lot of wasted time. And on the other hand, when it comes to supporting documents, like for example, if you want to do full population audit and want to do substantive tests, then you will have to process a lot of textual documents, and text mining and text processing is still a probabilistic process that is not absolutely 100% accurate. So then you will have a factor of uncertainty there. But process mining can still help you a lot, because for us, what we realized, it's a great way to navigate full populations. Because it's a very easy and self-evident way of seeing where is the exception, moving to see the timings and so on. So I see it as the first step to opening up new horizons for us.
Right. No, that's a really great point indeed, because it's a good way to put it. I mean, process mining is not the main or the first reason that you're looking at full populations. It's just the availability of the data, and even with other query tools or statistical methods, you could start analyzing all of that data. But process mining can perhaps help you to determine where you should look.
Yes, right? I said it's a great complement to traditional data analysis methods. Like in this last project, we use process mining to explore the data and to see what are the interesting or what are the points of interest for us. And then when we filter those events out, then we can do correlation testing and all sorts of statistical operations that we want to do.
Right.
But we would not have necessarily found those interesting subpopulation by just looking at tabular data.
Yes, and that again also closes the loop perhaps to what you're also illustrating really nicely, that you're getting into this hypothesis-free auditing, that process mining enables that approach, because you don't need to know all the questions before you start the analysis, but you can actually encounter patterns or aspects in the data in this way that then you can inspect further and determine, is this a problem or not.
Of course, it always helps if you have a hypothesis, but the good thing is that it's not really necessary to have a very elaborate hypothesis before you attack the data with process mining.
Right. Okay, perfect. I think that's a great place to end for today. I see there's already quite some discussion also going on in the community. So please add your own experience, your own perspectives, ask questions, what you would like to know more from Zsolt. And we will continue the discussion, and we will have you back on Monday at the same time to discuss these questions and discussions in our Process Mining Cafe.
Okay, thank you very much. And I hope I was not too fast and not too technical for the interested people.
No, I don't think so, because the people in the Process Mining camp there, I think you exactly match the level of what they can understand and they're interested in. So I think it was a really good overview. Like I said, both from a process mining perspective, but also specifically for a lot of interesting auditing topics. So let's keep the discussion going and see you all again on Monday.
Yeah, see you next week. Have a nice weekend. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Welcome everyone. We're at day 6 of this year's Process Mining Camp, and like every day we will start with our daily Process Mining Cafe, where we welcome back the speaker of the last session. So welcome back, Zsolt, from after your presentation on Friday. We're going to talk some more about process mining and audit.
Hello Anne, hello everybody, I'm happy to be back.
It's people really liked your presentation, and there were a lot of questions and discussions around all the various cases that you've presented. For example, Laurens, he really found their approach at the Flemish Audit Institution confirmed. So that's also nice to realize that you were doing something right. So I think it really nicely showed both general process mining points that are relevant for every process miner. For example, with case number 3, you had shown how you can take a complicated or a process that actually mixes different types of processes in one, how you, by separating the data sets, you can get more meaningful results out of it, or that you have to be careful in terms of finding sensitive data also in extra fields, like in free text fields that need special attention to be anonymized, but also topics that are specifically auditing relevant and focused, right? So for example, that auditors are not just looking at cases that are too long in terms of exceptions, but also that are too short. That's something that you mentioned. And I also really liked the example that you gave with segregation of duty violations in the small financial department, because sometimes people have used process mining as a way to test segregation of duties if, for example, the department is too small to have a financial or to have a system control in the first place, for example, to have different roles. But even if there's a violation, that could be still okay, right? If that's something that had to be done because the department is so small. So one thing I'm wondering, and Said was asking about this, he said that most of the process mining and audit projects that he sees are on the administrative side rather than on the financial side. Do you see more use cases for process mining in the IT audits, in the financial audit, or in the operational audit areas?
I think process mining is quite a special technology in a sense that it can be used for IT audit, it can be used for financial audit, and it can be used for administrative audit and even for more abstract level of auditing. So I think even though there are some inherent limitations in approaching things from the process view and not the content view, but I think it's a very viable and good technology for all fields that can be audited, basically. Right.
And so maybe that's also relating a little bit to the next question, because in your in your experience report, you were you were explaining that there is that there's two groups of people working together. So the data scientists, who are experts in data, and then the auditors, who are the professionals from the audit perspective. Yeah. And so in a way that the data specialists are preparing the work for the auditors. And for example, Dave disagreed and said that auditors are specialists in data themselves. So that's, I think, an interesting question. Also, we see at some of our customers that indeed the audit departments are kind of the front runners in process mining. So they're working with all kinds of data analytics techniques already. But maybe that's not the case for every auditor. So how do you see the data literacy and this kind of split in work in general in the audit area?
I think this type of specialization is a bit, you cannot avoid having people more versed in the data and data pre-processing and the data understanding and practical data application fields, because especially as I mentioned that in our field of business and in our case studies, data pre-processing was very, very important. And even if auditors have a good grasp of data and how to use data, maybe it's better if they focus on what they are doing best, and then the data analyst can focus on the data pre-processing part and all the nitty-gritty technicalities.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
so I think it's not an exclusive or. So you can be both, but I think it's very rare.
Right. So to understand you correctly, that kind of the data pre-processing that you had to do, or that you think people often have to do for process mining, goes beyond kind of the data analysis work that people are doing already with, for example, query tools like ACL or IDEA.
Yeah. Because the whole idea of ACL and IDEA is that the data that comes in is already relevant and usable for audit. So it's a pre-processed data stream that these softwares are developed to use.
Right. Okay, so it depends a little bit on the system. If it's, for example, a workflow system where the data comes out already in a format that's more or less ready to be used, that's okay. But if really like more considerable data preparations are needed, you need like a data science or data specialist team to help you.
Yes, and the point I want to make here is it's good because you shouldn't be worried if there are complexities or complications with data, because then the way to go is to ask somebody to pre-process the data for you, and then as an auditor you can say that, okay, this is what I can use for my professional audit work, and if it's still not okay, then they can come back. So the good thing with this approach is it does not prevent you from using data if the data quality or the data format is not directly usable for these tools.
Right. Okay, yeah, I think this kind of collaboration is needed in many process mining situations. So also here, I think that makes a lot of sense. So another aspect that you, I think, really nicely illustrated through the different cases that you presented on Friday is this, what you called hypothesis-free audit, so that you actually can learn things about the process without having the question beforehand. And that's also something that Mark added, that he sees the most added value in process mining is to find paths that you have not thought of, right? Especially in compliance and fraud audits. But often it's going to be a mix still, and there might be also some questions that you have. So Antonio was wondering, is there a certain order to this? Do you start with the exploratory views and your exploratory analysis, or do you start with questions? Is there a certain kind of systematic way to do this?
We are still working on establishing the methodology and sort of guidelines how to tackle these kind of problems with process mining. But usually we have combined approach. The auditors already have most of the audit questions in their audit plan. But since it's a new technology and we are investigating what can be done with it, we are open for this hypothesis-free exploration, because I think the best way to start with process mining is, even if the whole compliance checking part is not formalized yet, is to have the general audit questions and also to look at the data as it is and see how the audit questions could be iteratively tailored to the data patterns. So it's a kind of agile way of auditing.
Right. So if I understand you correctly, you do start with the questions, but by working iteratively, you're looking at the things that don't make sense or don't align with what you were expecting, and that's the exploratory part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so Olga was also wondering about the impact that your analysis has had on other departments, and I think it's a nice, have come full circle here, because you started your presentation by explaining that you actually learned about process mining by external auditors coming to your place and basically doing something that you then wanted to do yourself. So that's an effect that could also happen from your own work, right? That you're auditing a particular department and they see what you're doing and they say, well, actually, we should be able to do this ourselves. Have you experienced this already in your project so far?
Yes, we have already experienced it. As I said, we are working closely with the European Commission and the auditors, and they are very, very receptive, and it's a kind of a win-win situation, because both the auditor and the auditee can see the benefits and the value added brought about by process mining, because all the auditees are very interested and they are motivated in improving their processes. And I think it's also, deterrence is too strong of a word here, but if your auditors can see what you are capable of doing, they will be more motivated to avoid those compliance issues that can be avoided.
Right. So are these then mostly auditors in these departments that where you're analyzing the processes who get the results of your analysis, or?
For us, there's this traditional and established administrative procedure, the way we are communicating our results. So it goes to their own auditors and also to certain levels of hierarchy when we are reconciling the audit findings and we are clearing the facts. So in all these pilot cases, or in these case studies, the auditee was aware that we were using process mining, and they were aware that in these pilot cases that we need the cooperation of both the auditee and the auditor. And I can already see the changes in mindset that process mining is bringing about. Right.
Yes. So both the auditors, the internal auditors, then in this, on their side, and the responsible management, they're seeing the results and might get ideas. Maybe that's a good place also to talk a little bit more about the difference between private sector and public sector audit. You mentioned in your presentation also that you find that the tools are not really geared towards public sector audit. Also then, if those departments would start using process mining themselves, maybe they would do it in a different role, more from an internal audit perspective. Where do you see the main differences between public and private, first of all?
I think in the private sector, you have more standardized business processes, and especially because this multinational companies, they usually standardize on a process, and then they try to roll out this process to the different geographical business units. And in public sector audit, especially in EU audit, the organs or the agencies or the organizational units of the EU institutions, they are pretty much, some of them are standardized, but if we have to go to the national administration level of the member states, then they all use different types of systems that were specially created for that context and that legal environment. So I think the biggest difference is that public sector auditors, no matter how the process mining software offering develops, I think they will have to do more data processing work than private sector auditors.
Right. So really, yeah, the processes are less standardized, and there will always be more custom work needed to deal with this.
Yeah.
Right. So another really important topic also from your presentation on Friday, and also from the discussion, is again the topic of data quality and data integrity. And so for example, Johan was curious whether any of the projects that you've done so far already led to some possible proposals for improving the data, right? Sometimes that's the first thing that you actually encounter by doing the process mining analysis. You realize the flaws in the data, and those can be recommendations to actually improve the data. So did you have anything in this direction already?
We are working internally on establishing some kind of data baseline. So for us, it was a great learning experience, because now we know what we can expect in the future when we plan to roll out these methods and these applications. So we are not yet at the point of officially issuing data quality related recommendations, but we have already identified data quality as the next big issue that we want to work on our working groups with the national public auditors, and also at our summer university that we organize for national audit authorities. And in the long term, we are already thinking about this kind of data checklists or some kind of recommendations that we can publish for a sort of audit interchange format.
Right, so that then part of the audit would be indeed, like a regular part of the audit would be also recommendations, not just for how to address for example, the deviations that were discovered, but also the data quality.
Yes.
Okay, and Rien was wondering in this context how this assessment of the data quality and data integrity, how that changes if it's not your own data, because you're coming in from an outside auditor into these environments. So would it be different if that would be your own data that you would be auditing?
I think it's much easier to communicate, and I mean, if you're dealing with data production in-house, then it's much easier to ask for a different format or to ask for certain pre-processing steps or some data consolidation steps to be done on the backend side. Here, as an external auditor, we always have to follow the official channels, and communication could be a bit slower. And also, as an external auditor, we cannot put an unreasonable burden on the auditee to provide us they need to provide the data that we need, but it is our responsibility to ask for the specific format and so on. So it takes a bit more of a caution and pre-planning on our side, what we are asking for.
Right. Yes, and you are asking more from them on two levels, right? You're asking more, first of all, to actually be able to do the data analysis. You're asking more or different type of data from them than you would request for maybe a basic sample-based approach where you don't audit the whole system data. But then also if you're even giving additional recommendations, not just for the audited process, but that they have to do something about the way the data is collected, that's much more work and maybe costs for them that they might not be prepared.
Yes, and we can always ask, but there are certain legal regulations to be followed, and we cannot expect them at this point to do what is not yet required of them, if you know what I mean. I want to refer back to the audit standards and the current regulations in that respect, and also because historically these systems, or a lot of systems, they were not built to provide data in an abstraction level that process mining requires. Like we had this problem with the loops, and that some systems they do not record these loops in the process in a very easily manageable way. So in that case, when we identified where we were missing data, the auditee was very cooperative, and they checked their logs, and we discussed how they could provide the missing data for us so we could include it in our analysis. I think it's something that we need to work on in the future, and I think this is a very, very important step in moving public sector audit forward to full digitization.
Right. Yes, so defining these standards that you mentioned, that's the next step here, to really raise the bar and increase the level to step by step for making this better in the future, and to really have historical data and not have this loop problem, for example, that you encounter.
Yeah, because you have to imagine how new it is for them, because those, I'm sure that in your professional experience you have encountered it a lot of times, that these systems were built for a specific purpose, for specific regulatory requirements, and they are completely adequate for those rules and those requirements that were identified 20 years ago.
Right, exactly. Okay, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you all for tuning in for today's Process Mining Cafe. Please continue the discussion in the ECA channel. If you have more questions for Zsolt, please ask them there. Thank you, Zsolt, for coming on again today, and we'll stay in touch for the rest of the camp also.
Thank you very much.